Hey, my name is Marcus. I'm 34 years old, and I work out of a commercial vac company called Harlan Climate Services, on the industrial side of Harlan, Georgia, a mid-sized city about 40 minutes south of Atlanta, where the heat runs from April through October, and the winters are mild enough that most people think heating systems are someone else's problem. Right up until the moment they aren't. I've been doing commercial HVAC work since I was 24. I diagnose and repair heating, cooling, and ventilation systems in office buildings, warehouses, schools, restaurants, medical facilities, anything with ductwork, and a thermostat, and a maintenance manager who calls us at inconvenient times. My job is to understand, from symptoms, what a system is doing wrong before it fails completely. A bearing that's about to go in a fan motor changes pitch before it seizes. A refrigerant leak drops efficiency before it announces itself as a total failure. Condensate lines clog slowly, then suddenly. And the suddenly part is when someone calls us in a panic. I have learned over 10 years to hear the early signals, to catch the thing before it becomes a crisis. I'm good at it. I would be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind, more recently, that I am less good at applying this skill to anything that is not a mechanical system. My daily routine: in the shop by 7, pick up my schedule for the day, load the van with whatever parts I need, drive to the first job, work through the morning, call in updates, drive to the second, back to the shop in the late afternoon to file service reports and pick up anything that came in during the day. Home by 6 most nights, sometimes later when a job runs. I heat up dinner or pick something up on the way. I watch something. I go to bed early enough to be out the door at 6:30 the next morning without feeling it. On weekends, I handle the small residential calls that come in. Homeowners, not commercial. Because Raymond, who started the company 30 years ago and still comes in 3 days a week, likes to take care of longtime customers personally, and I help him with that. I live in a house I own on Sycamore Drive, 12 minutes from the shop. 3 bedrooms. I use one for sleeping and one for storage, and one for nothing in particular. The house is not too big and not too small, and it is very quiet in the evenings after I've come home, in the way of a house where nothing moves unless I move it. I have been in that house for 4 years. I have, in that time, replaced the water heater, refinished the back deck, and repaired the crawlspace vapor barrier. I have not done anything about the quietness, which does not require any technical skill to address, and which I have therefore left as is. 5 years ago, I was married for 2 years to a woman named Jennifer. We were 28 and 27, respectively, and we had made the honest mistake of confusing compatibility with love. We got along well. We had overlapping habits. We never fought in any serious way. What we did not have was the thing underneath all of that. The thing that either exists or it doesn't, and that cannot be substituted for by getting along well. We figured this out slowly, and then simultaneously, in the way you figure things out when nobody wants to be the first to say it. She moved back to her family in Columbus, and I stayed in the house on Sycamore Drive, and there was nothing dramatic about any of it, which was in some ways the most honest thing about the marriage. It ended the same way it had been going, which was quietly and without incident. I'm not bitter about it. I understood what had happened. I did not for a while know what to do with the understanding. That was 5 years ago. I have been since then in no hurry to be wrong about something like that again, which has led me to be in no particular hurry about anything, which is a way of protecting yourself that works very well right up until it doesn't. I want to tell you about Iris. She started at Harlan Climate Services 3 years ago, on a Monday in October, hired as our service coordinator, which means she schedules the jobs, dispatches the technicians, handles incoming calls, manages the customer relationships between jobs, and keeps track of approximately 40 moving pieces at any given moment. Our previous coordinator had retired after 16 years, and the job had been vacant for 6 weeks, which was 6 weeks of Raymond and the office manager Carol doing double duty, and the entire workflow of the company running about 15% below what it should have been. None of us would have admitted how much one person's absence had changed the feel of the place. Iris walked in on that Monday morning with a dark green cardigan and a low bun that was already coming loose at the temples, and she sat down at the coordinator's desk and opened a notebook before anyone had told her to take notes. Because she had already worked out that this was a job where you either kept track or you didn't, and she had decided she was going to keep track. Carol introduced her to the room. Iris said good morning and looked around at all of us with brown eyes that were calm and direct and a little tired in the way of someone who has already spent some time doing difficult things and is not easily impressed by difficulty. I said good morning back and picked up my schedule folder from the inbox on the counter and went to load my van because that was what I did every morning and I saw no reason to change it. I was halfway out to the lot when I heard her voice behind me. She was already on the phone, handling a call that had come in while Carol was doing the introduction, and her voice had the quality of someone who could hold 10 things in their head simultaneously and make each one feel like it was the only thing. I did not stop walking. But I noted it. The way I note the early sound of a bearing that's about to go. By the end of her first week, she had the job under control in a way that would have taken most people a month. By the end of her first month, I had stopped thinking about the 6 weeks before her arrival. By the third month, she knew every technician's schedule by memory, every customer's service history by feel, and every quirk of the job routing system that Raymond had built over 30 years, and that the rest of us navigated mostly by habit. She had not asked for a manual for any of this. She had simply paid attention until she understood it, which is how I try to do everything, and which I recognized in her the way you recognize a method you use yourself. There was a Friday in late April, about 6 months after she started. A call came in at 4:45. A restaurant across town, walk-in cooler failed. They had a Saturday catering event for 200 people. I was already in my van heading back to the shop. Iris took the call, got the details, called me before I'd even made it back to the lot. She had the service history for the restaurant pulled up, the model number of the cooler on the screen, the parts list from the last repair already showing. "It's the compressor relay," I said, before she'd finished describing the symptoms. "It went out on them 18 months ago. They got an aftermarket replacement. It won't hold." "I have the part number," she said. "Ray's got one in the van from a job he didn't use. Tell him to meet me there." She called Ray and redirected him and called the restaurant manager and called me back with the access code for the utility entrance and stayed on the line at the office while I worked, fielding the 2 other calls that came in and handling them without putting me on hold. I finished the job at 8:15 that night. The restaurant's walk-in was running cold and correct. I was in my van in the parking lot, the city dark around me, and I called her to confirm the job was closed. "Good," she said. There was a brief silence on the line. Not uncomfortable. Just 2 people who had been working in sync for 3 hours, sitting with the fact that it was over. "Good night, Iris," I said. "Good night, Marcus," she said. I drove home thinking about the silence. Not obsessively, just noting it. The way you note something that has a sound you haven't heard before and want to make sure you remember. That was 6 months in. I did not call it anything at that point. I was not ready to call it anything. I was the man who mistook compatibility for love and paid for it, and I had learned to move carefully in the direction of the things I was not ready to think about directly. I moved carefully for 3 years. There are things that accumulated in those 3 years that I can list now but could not have named then, because naming them would have required admitting what they meant. The way she laughed when I said something she hadn't expected, fully, without thinking about it, and then slightly surprised by herself. The fact that on the days she was out sick or at a conference, the rhythm of the whole morning was off in a way I couldn't attribute to the replacement coordinator's competence or lack of it. It was specifically Iris's absence that changed the shape of the day. The way she spoke to customers who were frustrated or frightened, not reassuring them with false information, but giving them the honest situation in a tone that made the honest situation feel manageable. I watched her do this dozens of times and never got tired of watching her do it. About 18 months in, she was out sick for a week. I don't know what she had. We weren't in the habit of personal conversations about health. But she was out all week, and on the Thursday of that week I fixed the coffee machine in the break room that she'd submitted a maintenance request for 2 months earlier, and that Raymond had been meaning to get to. I fixed it in 22 minutes during my lunch break. I did not write a note. I did not tell anyone I'd done it. She came back on a Monday, and she found the coffee machine working, and she stood in the break room for a moment looking at it. And then she looked at me across the room, and I looked back, and neither of us said anything. I thought about that moment for longer than was warranted by a coffee machine. There was a night in that second year, late winter, when we both ended up working late on year-end service reports. Raymond liked them filed by calendar year, and December always ran heavy with jobs, which meant the paperwork backed up. I was in the back room with the service logs, and Iris was at her desk, and somewhere around 7, it became clear that neither of us was going to finish soon. She made coffee and brought a cup to the back room without asking, and set it on the corner of the desk I was working at, without interrupting what I was doing, and went back to her own desk. I looked at the cup for a moment before I picked it up. She had brought me coffee at 7 in the evening in an otherwise empty building without a word about it, in the same way I had fixed the coffee machine without a word about it, and I understood, in a way I had been carefully not understanding for 18 months, that we had developed something between us that had a grammar specific to the two of us, and that I had been speaking it and hearing it fluently for long enough that the only remaining question was whether I was ever going to name it. I drank the coffee and finished the service reports and said goodnight, and went home and sat on the back deck and thought about this for a long time. Not directly. I thought around it the way I sometimes circle a mechanical problem I'm not ready to open up yet, looking at everything adjacent until the shape of the thing becomes clear from its edges. The shape that became clear was this. I had been careful with Iris, the way I had been careful with nothing else in my life since Jennifer. I had moved slowly and kept things professional, and told myself this was wisdom. What I had not examined was the possibility that careful and quiet look identical from the other side of the desk. About 2 years in, on a quiet Friday afternoon when Carol had left early and Ray was on a job across town and it was just the two of us, she asked me why I'd gotten into SHVAC. Not my background, not my license. Why? I thought about it. My father took me to a job when I was about 10, I said. He was an electrician. Residential. I watched him work on a bad panel and I couldn't figure out how he knew what to do. It was like he was reading something I couldn't see yet. He said, "Every system tells you what's wrong. You just have to learn the language." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you?" "Took about 3 years to hear it clearly," I said. "After that, it was just practice." She looked at her screen for a moment. Then, without quite looking at me, "I grew up in a house where nothing ever got fixed. Not the heat, not the plumbing, not anything." She said it in the flat tone of something stated and set aside. "My parents weren't good at maintenance." On anything. A pause. I think that's why I like this job. Everything that breaks has a reason, and there's always a way to fix it if someone pays attention early enough. I sat with that. Not always, I said. No, she said. But most things. Most things just needed someone who noticed before it got too far. She finally looked at me. Her expression was careful and steady and honest in the specific way of someone who is saying something with more than one layer and is trusting you to hear both. I've always thought that was the whole skill, just noticing in time. I drove home with that sentence in the front of my mind. I thought about it the way I thought about the Friday night phone call and the coffee machine and the cup brought to the back room at 7 p.m. I thought about how a system always tells you what's wrong if you've learned the language, and about a man who learned that language at 10 years old and had spent 2 years declining to apply it to anything that was not mechanical. I thought about this more than was warranted by anything, and I filed it, again, under not yet, and I kept moving carefully. About 6 months before she passed me the note, Harlan Climate took on a large commercial contract, a building renovation project that needed a full system assessment before the SHVAC redesign could be quoted. The assessment required both the technical detail I could provide and the service history and customer relationship records that Iris managed. We ended up in the conference room together on a Tuesday evening at 5:30, after everyone else had gone home, going through building plans and service logs and load calculations. She ordered takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks over, and I ate pad Thai from a takeout container while I walked her through the ductwork layout of a 6-story building. And she asked questions that were better than most of the questions I get from engineers. And I answered them. And somewhere around 7:30 I looked up and realized we had been talking for 2 hours without either of us. Trying to end the conversation. "You should be able to quote this now," I said. "I already could," she said. "I've been doing the math in my head since the 2nd floor." She tilted her head at the building plans. "I just wanted to understand how the whole thing fit together." I sat with that for a moment. "Most people don't care about how the whole thing fits together," I said. "They care whether it's going to be too hot or too cold." She looked at me over the takeout container she was closing up. "Most people don't care how anything fits together," she said. "They just care whether it's working." A pause. I've always thought that was a limitation. I drove home that night thinking about a lot of things. I filed all of them under not yet and went to bed. The thing about working beside someone every day for 3 years is that the accumulation is invisible to you while it's happening. You don't notice it the way you'd notice if someone handed you 3 years in a box and said, "Here, hold this." It just arrives in the ordinary way of things, one morning after another, one schedule folder, one phone call, one emergency dispatched and resolved and followed by the particular silence on the line that meant good work. You accumulate, and you don't look at what you're carrying because looking at it would require you to name it, and you have decided you are moving carefully. I am slow. In the interest of telling this honestly, I am telling you that first. Derek joined Harlan Climate about 2 months before the note. He came in as account manager for new commercial clients, not a technical role, client-facing, the part of the business that Raymond had been wanting to grow, and that required someone with different skills than I have. Derek was 36 and at ease with himself in a way that I respect in principle and found, in practice, briefly irritating for reasons I chose not to examine. He was good at his job. He was warm and direct with everyone in the office. And about 3 weeks after he started, I noticed that he was particularly direct with Iris. Not inappropriate, just present in a way that I had not been. In the specific way of a man who knows what he wants and sees no practical reason to be quiet about it. He asked her to lunch about 6 weeks in. She went. I was on a job across town, and I told myself it was not my business, and kept working and replaced a faulty expansion valve in a 40-ton unit and loaded my van and drove to the next job. I did all of this correctly and professionally and without incident. And I went home that evening and sat on the back deck of the house on Sycamore Drive and thought about a Tuesday evening in a conference room with pad thai and building plans, and a woman who wanted to understand how the whole thing fit together. And I thought about the coffee machine, and about the silence at the end of the phone call, and about the 3 years I had filed under not yet. Not yet had become an answer that was less comfortable than it used to be. The Thursday Iris passed me the note was an ordinary morning. I came in at 7, said good morning to Carol, went to pick up my schedule folder from the inbox on Iris's counter. Iris was on the phone, a customer in the middle of a problem, and she handed me the folder without looking up, the way she always did when she was mid-call, the routine so established that she didn't need to look. I took the folder and went out to the lot and climbed into my van and opened the folder to review the day. The note was folded once. Inside the front of the folder, a small square of paper, my name on the outside, in her handwriting. I sat in the van with the engine idling and looked at it for a moment. Then I unfolded it. I've liked you quietly for 3 years. I thought you should know. I sat there for a while. Outside the van, the parking lot was doing its ordinary morning business. Ray pulling out in his van, a delivery truck at the loading dock, the sound of the city warming up in the early October air. I have been, as I said, a man who diagnoses from symptoms. I have trained myself to hear the early signal, to catch the note of something wrong, or in this case, something right, before it announces itself in a crisis. I had been hearing this particular signal for 3 years. I had filed it carefully and accurately and done nothing about it, which is the diagnostic equivalent of knowing your compressor relay is failing and declining to replace it. I thought about that Tuesday evening in the conference room, about a Friday night at a walk-in cooler, and the silence at the end of the phone line at 8:15, about a coffee machine fixed on a Thursday without a note, about a morning 2 weeks ago when I'd come in and she'd already redirected an emergency call and handled it before I'd walked through the door, and the specific quality of the look she'd given me over the counter when she handed me the updated schedule, not expecting anything, not performing anything, just there, just accurate, just exactly herself. 3 years. I had been sitting across from something I had refused to name for 3 years because I had been wrong before and careful ever since. And someone had just handed me a folded piece of paper that cost her more courage than I had managed in 36 months. I drove to the first job. I replaced a fan motor in a medical office building and recalibrated the thermostat and cleaned the coil and filed the service report in the lot. Then I sat in the van for another 20 minutes before I could make myself pull out. I took the note out of my shirt pocket and read it again. I've liked you quietly for 3 years. I thought you should know. I thought about the word quietly. I had not used that word about Iris, not consciously, but standing in that parking lot, I understood it was the exact right word. Quiet was how she had held it for 3 years. Quiet was how she had handed it to me, in a folder, in the middle of a call, without a signal. Quiet was how she had conducted 3 years of something real and patient and unacknowledged, and the patience of it. The specific weight of 3 years carried without complaint and without demand made me sit very still for a while. I drove to the second job, which was a school on the east side that needed its ductwork inspected before the winter. I climbed into the ceiling access and worked my way through the mechanical runs, and I found 2 sections that needed resealing, and I marked them, and came back down, and stood in the school's mechanical room with the note folded back in my pocket. And I thought about what I was going to say. I have never been good at saying the thing. I am good at showing up and doing the work and letting the work speak, and I have a documented history of believing this is sufficient, and a documented history of being wrong about it. Iris had written the words. She had put them in my hands in the only way she knew I would find them, in my schedule folder, which I open every morning without fail, which is the most reliable delivery mechanism for anything she needed to be sure I received. She had found the one place she knew I would look. The minimum I could do was say something back in actual language before she decided about the Atlanta job, before the day ended, before the version of myself that was still moving carefully talked me back into silence. I filed the duct inspection report from the school lot and drove back toward the shop. Carol was at her desk when I came in. She looked at me once. Carol has been at Harlan Climate for 22 years and does not waste words or expressions. What she gave me was the look of a woman who has been watching something fail to happen for a long time and can see, from the expression on my face, that this is the day it finally happens. Then she turned back to her screen. I found out about the other job from Ray, who had heard it from Carol, who had heard it from Derek, who had apparently made it his business to know. A company in Atlanta, larger, commercial contractor, better title and probably better salary. Iris had been in conversations with them for about 3 weeks. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone at Harlan directly. She was, by Ray's account, still deciding. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about what a note passed in a schedule folder on the morning she was still deciding something like that meant. She wasn't asking me to stop her. She wasn't asking me to do anything. She was just putting it on record, saying the true thing before the moment passed. Iris was at her desk. It was 4:30, and the office was mostly cleared out. Just her and Carol and the end of the day's calls. I walked to her desk, and I stood there. She looked up. She had the expression of someone who has done something that cost them something, and is now in the waiting part, which is the hardest part. "I found the note," I said. She nodded once. She didn't look away. "I need to say something," I said, "and I'm going to say it badly because I don't. I'm better at this when there's a system to diagnose and a procedure to follow. So I'm going to say it, and you can tell me where I've gotten it wrong." I paused. "I've been in this shop with you for 3 years. I have been aware, for most of that time, of something that I've been moving carefully around, because I made one real mistake in my life about thinking a good thing was the right thing, and I decided not to make that mistake again, by being sure before I said anything. What I did not account for was that being sure and being quiet look identical from the outside. That every morning you handed me a schedule folder and knew how I took my coffee and stayed on a phone line until a job was finished was something I was receiving without saying what it meant to me. That was my fault. That was 3 years of not saying the thing because I was waiting until I was completely certain, which is, I stopped. "I'm certain," I said. "I have been for long enough that it embarrasses me to say this is the first time I'm saying it out loud. I don't want you to take the other job." That is a selfish reason. The reason that is not selfish is that I have been in a lot of buildings in this city, and I have learned to tell the difference between a system that is running and a system that is running right. And the only time in the past several years that this place has been running right has been since you walked in on a Monday morning in October with a notebook you'd already opened. I should have said that. I looked at her. I'm saying it now. She was quiet for a moment. The office around us had the late afternoon quiet of a place winding down, just the faint sound of Carol's keyboard from the next room and the hum of the building's own system overhead. "I almost didn't give you the note," she said. "What made you?" She looked at her hands on the desk. "Derek asked me to dinner again last night," she said. and I was turning him down, and I realized. She looked up at me. I realized I was saying no for a reason I'd never actually said out loud. To anyone. She paused, including myself. Her voice was steady and clear. "I'm not going to take the Atlanta job," she said. "I decided that before this morning. But I wanted you to know before I stayed. I have been in buildings at every stage of disrepair. I have seen systems that have been neglected for so long that the damage is structural, that no repair can fully restore what the neglect undid. I have also seen systems that look irreparably broken, but are not. That have been running cold and wrong for so long that they need only one correct repair in the right place. And then they run exactly as they were built to run, as if no time was lost. There is a particular sound to a system that has just been brought back to right. I know it when I hear it. I knew it. Standing at Iris's desk at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon, in the way you know something that has been waiting to be true for 3 years. I walked around the desk. She stood up. The distance between us was not much, and we crossed it at the same time, and the first time I put my hands on her face, she closed her eyes and tilted her head up in the way of someone who has been waiting for something and is finally allowing themselves to stop waiting. Afterward, she had her head on my shoulder, and I was leaning against the corner of the desk, and I said, "The Atlanta job. I told you," she said. "I know. I'm glad you didn't." "I know you are," she said. "I've known that for about a year." She looked up at me with the expression she got when she had been right about something and was not going to pretend otherwise. "You're not as hard to read as you think you are. You're just slow." Carol appeared in the doorway of the office at some point in the next few minutes. I don't know how long she had been standing there, and she looked at us with the expression of a woman who has been watching something not happen for years and is very glad to see it finally happening. She said, "I'll lock up." Then she went back to her desk. Raymond heard about it on Friday, which in a company of 12 people means he heard about it approximately as soon as Carol's door closed. He called me on Saturday morning and said, without preamble, that took long enough. I told him I moved carefully. He said, "Marcus, a thermostat doesn't need 3 years to decide what temperature to set." I told him he was right. He said he knew, and hung up, which is how Raymond handles most things. By November, she had been to the house on Sycamore Drive enough times that the second bedroom, the one I used for nothing in particular, had acquired a purpose, which was to hold the things she left behind: a change of clothes, a book, the particular brand of tea she drank in the mornings that I bought, because I noticed she was always looking for it in the break room and never finding it. She noticed the tea on the kitchen counter the first morning I had it there, and she stood in the kitchen looking at it for a moment the way she'd stood looking at the repaired coffee machine 18 months earlier, and then she looked at me, and I looked back, and neither of us said anything, because neither of us needed to. She did not take the Atlanta job. She did, about 8 months later, take a coordinator role at a larger company, one with better pay and a different kind of challenge, and she was good at it in the way she was good at everything she turned her attention to. I moved my service territory to overlap with her new office's part of the city, which Raymond accepted without comment because it made business sense, and because after 30 years of running a small company, he understood what actually makes a business run. The house on Sycamore Drive has 3 bedrooms and is 12 minutes from my shop, and is less quiet than it used to be, by a specific and welcome margin. On the evenings I come home first, I have learned to start the coffee before she arrives, because I know how she takes it, and I know what time she usually gets home. And these are the kinds of things that accumulate between people who pay attention to each other. Slowly, precisely, in the early signal, before anything announces itself. I have spent my working life listening for what a system is about to tell me before it fails. I have learned that the early signal is always there if you are listening for it. The mistake I made for 3 years was confusing listening with waiting, as if the hearing were the whole job, as if the thing that followed the hearing could be filed under "not yet" indefinitely without cost. A system that is running wrong does not improve by being left alone. It requires someone to do the work. Iris had been the one to do the work. She folded a piece of paper in half and put it in a schedule folder and handed it to me on an ordinary morning, and what was inside it was 3 years of paying attention. The least I could do was stop moving carefully and say what I had been failing to say for 36 months. The least I could do, I am learning, is usually more than enough. There is a particular sound a heating system makes when it comes up to temperature after running cold for too long. Not dramatic, just a settling, a shift in the quality of the hum. Something that tells you the whole system has finally equalized and is running the way it was built to. You hear it, and you know, without checking the gauges, that the work is done and the thing is right. I know that sound. I have been hearing a version of it, in the particular quality of an evening on Sycamore Drive, ever since a Thursday afternoon in October when a woman who had been quiet for 3 years handed me a folded piece of paper and waited to see what I would do with it. What I did with it was walk around a desk, 4 years too late and right on time.